In this episode of Dentside Depot, we're going to take a complete look of the 1973 through 1979 4x4 full-size truck history that is going to be Highboys, Lowboys, F100s, and F150s. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you the complete history of these trucks, what to expect with them, and everything else. I actually want to start today with what is not a Lowboy and what is also not a Highboy, and that is any 4x4 truck from 1973 through 1979 that is an F100 or an F150, because they are not Highboy trucks and they are also not Lowboy trucks. They are completely different from the two. There's also a distinction from 73 to 76 and 77 through 79 that makes them slightly different, but really essentially almost exactly identical. Now, one of the big defining features of these particular trucks is that they came equipped with 5 lug axles. So you typically would have a 9-inch in the rear, or maybe a Dana 44, and then in the front you would always have the Dana 44 5 lug axle. Another big difference with the light duty 4x4 trucks is that they came with springs in the front, coil springs for the suspension, and the axles are what's known as a wedge axle. So the axle itself actually has a wedge built into the tubes on each side, and there are radius arms that come out, and we can take a look at those radius arms here from the side. And this is the radius arm that you see right here, and this suspension setup is obviously completely different from the Highboy and Lowboy trucks because those had leaf springs, as we will get into later. Now the rear suspension is identical, being a leaf spring rear, 3-inch for this particular model being a 79. Now you would see some transfer case differences throughout the years, but this particular one being a 79 has the NP205 and it's attached to the C6. Now the distinction between these trucks from 73 to 79 is from 73 to 76, these particular trucks could come in an F100 4x4. Now in 77, Ford ceased making the F100 4x4s. They would only offer the F150 4x4, but they were essentially the same truck. Really, when you're talking about the light duty 5 lug 4x4 pickup trucks, the most important characteristic is these were the only 4x4s that you could get in a short bed. None of the F250 and none of the F350 trucks would come in the 6-foot bed, except for one particular exception, which we will talk about when we get there. But overall, these were the only trucks that you could get with the short bed. So with that being said, 77 through 79 would be F150 4x4 only. This one here being my special Dearborn edition package, but you could get them in all different sorts of things. So now let's get into the Highboys and the Lowboys. Okay, from 73 through 77 and a half, Ford would feature the Highboy truck, and they would be a leaf spring front and rear axle, and there would be a whole bunch of different things that would be offered between the Lowboy and the Highboy models. Now, I previously said that you could not get a short bed Highboy or Lowboy truck. The exception to that rule, and the only exception to that rule, is the crew cabs. The crew cab 4x4s were actually all short bed, but besides that, everything else was the long bed truck. Highboys for the regular cabs, all long bed, short beds for the Highboy crew cab 4x4s, no Highboy super cabs, and then the Lowboys, they would all be regular 8-foot beds in all instances. Now, one unique distinction is the super cabs. You could get them in an F150 4x4. They would also be a long bed, and they would have the heavy duty suspension in the front. I guess it's because Ford didn't want to manufacture a special frame just for that particular truck. So now what I'm going to do for the rest of the video is we're going to go over all the different unique features for each one. I'm going to start with the history of the Highboys, since they came first, and then we will end with the history of the Lowboys, and this being the pinnacle right here, which is the Dana 60 Kingpin front axle high pinion that everyone wants to have. So let's get into it. Enjoy the rest of the video.
The Highboy was truly a unique vehicle, and Chevy and Dodge did not really have a truck that could even compete with this particular model. Many parts of the Highboy truck would be different than all the other trucks that Ford offered between 1973 through mid-1977. First of all, let's make sure that we fully understand the term Highboy. A Highboy truck is considered a 1967 to 1977.5 Ford F250 4x4 built before serial number Y20001. That is generally accepted as a Highboy truck. During the 1977 model year, Ford would transition to what is called the Lowboy truck. This took place approximately in February of 1977, which would have been halfway through the model year of trucks being built. The model year typically started around September of each year. One of the major characteristics associated with all 6th generation Highboy trucks is that they all had a divorce transfer case. A divorce transfer case refers to a transfer case that sits on its own, as in it is not actually attached to the back of the transmission, which would generally be called a married transfer case. The Highboy trucks from 73 to 77 would have had a Dana 24, an NP205, or an NP203 transfer case. The frame of the Highboy trucks was different than all other Ford trucks from 73 to 79. The Highboy frame can be identified by having a rear length of 33.5 inches. This created specific design challenges when putting the truck together. More specifically, because of the narrower frame compared to all the other trucks, a rear-mounted fuel tank would not work. As such, the fuel tank would have been mounted inside of the cab, or additionally, you could have a saddle tank on the side, but you would never see a Highboy with the fuel tank in the back because it simply just wouldn't fit. Engine options for the Dentside Highboy trucks were limited to the 300, the 360, and then later variants could have had the 351M, or the 400 in 1977 only. Interestingly enough, the earlier Highboys before the Dentsides could have been had with the 240 inline 6 and also the 352 cubic inch V8, which would definitely be a unique motor to have. Of all of these engines, the 300 is probably the most legendary. We can also note that the 360 could have been easily swapped for a 390, and then the Highboys in 1977 would have been particularly desirable because the 351M or the 400 could come out and a 460 could have gone right in. You will not see any Highboy trucks with a factory 390 or 460 engine. The front axles for Highboy trucks were definitely unique. They all would have been Dana 44 or Dana 60 axles with 410 gears. A few different designs would come up during this time period. Some would have disc brakes and many would have drum brakes. It would be desirable to swap out one of these axles for a later model Dentside front axle, specifically a high pinion Dana 60 Kingpin. Because of the Highboy's limitations created by the divorce transfer case, Ford had to come up with a new design for how the suspension setup would work. As such, more space was needed under the truck to accommodate for the divorce transfer case. Because of this, a Highboy typically would have been equipped with either a 5 or a 6 spring front leaf pack at 3 inches wide. It would also have a greater arch to accommodate said divorce transfer case, and then the rear would typically have a 9-leaf pack with a greater arch, but they would only be 2¼ inch wide, and they would be equipped with lift blocks in the rear as well. And that brings us to 1977 and what many people would consider to be the creme de la creme of all Highboy trucks. 1977 was probably the premier year for the Highboy, as this particular truck offered the most options, with the greatest packages of all time for any Highboy in history. And that brings us to 1977 and a half through 1979 with the introduction of the Ford Lowboy truck, a step forward in engineering for Ford pickup trucks that would introduce completely brand new designs that would be much better than its predecessor, the Highboy. A Lowboy Ford pickup truck is an F250 and in 1979 only, an F350 4x4 built from March 1977 and assembled after serial number Y20000 all the way through the end of 6th generation Ford truck production in 1979. Now let's take a look at all the specific different characteristics of these particular trucks as they varied greatly from their predecessor, the affectionately known Ford Highboy. The Lowboy pickup trucks would introduce a completely new transfer case design. While the NP205 was available on the Highboy truck, it was always a divorced transfer case and never a married transfer case. In this particular instance, all Lowboy pickup trucks would feature an NP205 married transfer case that you can see right here. The next key difference or change that Ford made starting in 1977 and a half was a change to the frame. Ford on their 4x4 pickup trucks, specifically the Lowboys, would now have a 37.5 inch wide frame. The purpose of making this change was to allow for a fuel tank to be placed in the back of the pickup truck. Engine options for the Lowboy would be somewhat the same depending on the year. While Highboy pickup trucks in 1977 could have the 351M and the 400, all of the Lowboy trucks would have a 351M or a 400. In addition, you could also get the 300 straight 6 on Lowboy pickup trucks. Unfortunately, much like the Highboys, Ford did not offer the big block 460 like they did on the two-wheel drive trucks throughout the 1970s. The two axles that were offered for the Lowboy pickup trucks would be the Dana 60 Kingpin starting in 1978 or the Dana 44 HD High Pinion in 1977 through 1979. You can see the Dana 60 Kingpin here on the left and the Dana 44 on the right. The easiest way to identify the difference between the two is just to simply look at the steering knuckle. It is clearly obvious which one is a Kingpin and which one is a Dana 44 by simply looking in that particular area. One thing Ford did not change for the Lowboy trucks is they still offered the 4x4 heavy-duty trucks in a regular cab and a crew cab configuration. One thing that did change is you could now get these trucks with a camper special or a trailer special. There would be additional trailering options that you couldn't necessarily get on earlier model Highboys. One of the biggest changes for the Lowboy trucks would come about in 1978. This would be the first year that Ford would offer the Super Cab truck available in 4x4. 1978 would be the premier year to have a Super Cab truck, and then it would crescendo in 1979 with the F350 Super Cab truck. Today, those particular 4x4s are extremely rare and sought after by collectors. The Lowboy pickup trucks would feature all of the interior options that you could get on any of the two-wheel drive pickup trucks, but the decor and the trim was much greater than it was for the Highboys. All the way at the bottom, like the Highboys, would be the custom trim, where you would get the base vinyl or cloth package. Next up would be the Ranger that would feature some additional options. Then you would have the Ranger XLT as the third option for interior trim packaging. And then lastly, and new for 1978 and continued through 1979, the new top dog would become the Ranger Lariat. This would be Ford's top package and would feature a very, very nice decor package inside of the pickup truck. Although many people prefer the Highboys over the Lowboy pickup trucks, there's no doubt that the Lowboy was an advancement in general engineering design and drove much better than the Highboy pickup trucks. If you enjoyed this episode of Dentside Depot, remember to like and subscribe and keep restoring those classic trucks.